We have Helen Meadows, who is the Assistant Director of Planning, Matthew Rook, the Area Team Manager, and to my left is Dawn Matthews, the Committee Officer. We're not expecting the fire drill today, so if the fire alarm sounds, we will evacuate the building. There are 2 fire exits from this room, through the double doors where you came in, behind you, at the back of the room, and please note, do not use the lift in the event of a fire. The other fire exit is through the door to your right-hand side, and that leads to an external fire escape. We meet to the left of the driveway of the main entrance to Fort Lodge. Thank you. The meeting is being live streamed, and members of the public, you are welcome to film the proceedings as long as they're not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record the meeting, could you please identify yourself now? No, thank you. Can you please all ensure your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silence, and councillors may I remind you not to use your mobile phones while the committee is in session. We will have a comfort break at some point during the meeting, should the need arise, and if you do need to take a phone call and you could please leave the room, and you understand that you won't be able to vote on the matter under discussion. The items will be considered in the order printed on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangement has been made in accordance with the council scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, parish council with a maximum of 15 minutes per category. And I must stress that only people who have registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present their application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, which will be followed by questions from members of the committee. And these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is parish, town council first, followed by objectors and finally supporters. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak to the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes. This will be followed by questions again from members of the committee. These questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents or photographs at this meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting?
Yes, Chairman, I'd just like to say one thing. I understand this will be Matthew Rook's last meeting of the Planning Committee, and I'm sure everybody would join with me in wishing him all the best and thanking him for his long and dedicated service to Broadland District Council.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. You stole my thunder. But you being the longest serving member of the committee, I'm sure that's fine. Thanks, Matthew. Well, while we're on that, Matthew, I mean, he will be sadly missed. He's been here for 26 years, and he started in 1995 on a month's contract, I believe, and he's still here. He's moving on to the other side, so we may well see him again sitting on the tables in front of us. But like I said, we all wish him all the very best, and he's welcome back anytime. Thank you, Matthew. So, and he is a superstar. So thank you, Matthew. I was going to do that at the end, so sorry, guys, that you had to. Right, item 1 on the agenda is to receive declarations of interests. Do we have? Okay, Councillor Karimi.
Item number 4 is in Taverham. It's in my ward in Taverham, and I'm also on the parish council, but I do not comment on any planning applications.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. The application number 3, neighbouring properties owned by a member of my family. I have no pecuniary interest in that, and I've had no discussion with the individual either.
Okay, thank you very much.
Also, myself, Chairman, I'm the ward councillor for Taverham North as well. But again, like Caroline, I have not discussed it or made up my mind on the application as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Okay, item number 2, to report apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillors Riley, Kay Vincent and Ward, and Councillor Hempsall is substitute.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Hempsall. And item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of June. Can I take them as a true reflection of the day's events? You want that? So? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And item 4, any matters arising? No? Okay. Moving on to the applications. Our applications for planning permission. Moving on to item 1 is land west of Abbey Farm, Commercial Park, Horsham St Faves. Georgina, can you? Yep, thanks very much. Okay, over to you, Matthew.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. You'll see from the agenda, page 14, this is an application for 7 commercial buildings for classes B2, B8 and EG purposes, parking, servicing areas, ancillary infrastructure, structural landscaping, including extension to earth bunds, pedestrian footways and cycleways, creation of new vehicular access from Church Street and associated works. This application is reported to committee as the recommendation to approve is contrary to the development plan. If I take you through the slides, this first slide here identifies the red line of the application site and also the existing location of the Abbey Farm Commercial Park. We have Church Street running down on the southern boundary of the site. The village of Horsham St Faith and the village church is in this position here. And you can see the application site itself, which extends in front of the existing Abbey Farm commercial site. This area here is the main area of built development. And then we've got an extended area of land to the northeast and north of the existing Abbey Farm, where there's existing drainage and bunding. There's an existing bunding at this position immediately to the west of the built form of the existing commercial park, as well as a bund that runs in that position there. Taking you through the slides, so you can see the aerial photograph of the site. Again, Church Street here, A140 junction, and this road runs then into Church Street running off towards Horsford direction. This is the village of Horsham St Faiths, and you can see the area that are referred to, which is this area here is the location of the proposed main built development as an extension of the Abbey Farm commercial estate. And then the land to the north, much more sort of open meadows and pastures running through to the A140 and agricultural land beyond. This is taken from the site allocations DPD, so you can see the red line of the settlement limit that's defined around Horsham St Faith, but also you can see this blue employment allocation, which is in this part of the site, which takes in the built form, but it doesn't include the area, that extended area that I mentioned into this area here. And it's that element that is means that the application is contrary to policy, because the allocation does not take in the whole of the application site itself. But you can see the context of the site to the existing built form and the settlement itself. So it's a join in that existing built form. The report identifies conservation areas and listed buildings. So this is the extent of the conservation area for the village. And it does extend just across that first part of the frontage up to the existing site access. I'll refer to that when I go through the appraisal section of my presentation. But it's that area there that's particularly relevant because that's the line of where the footway and cycleway is intended to run, connecting from an existing footpath to the existing site entrance. Listed buildings. So obviously the church itself is listed building. There are listed buildings on the opposite side of Church Street, and St Faith's Priory is also a listed building and a scheduled monument. Again, I'll mention those elements and they're referred to in the report. The main built development that's before members today is in this area of the site, so set away from those listed buildings. Then these are the proposals. So once again, getting your bearings, this is the existing commercial park with the existing site access. Proposal is to provide a 3-metre wide footway and cycleway across that part of the site frontage, connecting to the footpath that runs in front of the church. So we'll have a continuous footway provision to the site entrance here. There's then a provision of a 1.5 metre wide footway, which is going to run all the way to the new site access. So the new site access is then provided in that position. And then that's the 7 commercial units that are before members today. There's an existing bund, I've got some photographs in a moment, that runs along that western boundary of the existing built form. Part of that's going to have to be removed to facilitate this development, and the spoil from that is to be located into this area here, where there's an existing bund that's to be remodeled and enlarged and landscaped. The bund that sits on the western boundary here is also to be landscaped, but the proposal is to have this sort of continuous route through the development. So any sort of delivery vehicles or anything like that that may be serving different units within the site don't have to come back out and go back in again. There's an internal sort of connection through the site, which obviously to the benefit of keeping traffic within the development itself rather than coming back out onto Church Street. And then the proposals are for surface water drainage lagoons in these locations here and here and further beyond, enlargement around that. And I'll talk again about that when I get to the assessment section. It gives you an impression of the relationship of the buildings, setback from the road, landscape into the front here. So we're trying to keep quite a fairly soft appearance to the road, which is characteristic through that frontage of the site. And then some images of the buildings themselves, brick base, clad into the walls on all sides, sheet roofing. So it's a fairly typical form of development, which will match the form of development on the adjoining commercial park. So that's running through those slides. And then some photographs. I mentioned the frontage of the site. So this is the location where the 3 metre wide shared cycle and footway is to be provided, which then just connects just slightly off this slide here. There's a footway which then continues through down into the village, so pedestrians and cyclists could gain access to the site without actually needing to get onto the carriageway. You can just see there where that car is. That's the existing entrance into the site. So that's to be retained for the existing development. And they're the views looking back the other way. So obviously the existing access, 3 metre wide footway, cycleway provided in that position. And then looking in the opposite direction, this is then the position running towards the new 1.5 metre wide footway and the new vehicular access set about in this position up here. These trees are being sought to be retained. I think the hedging may have to go, but there is landscaping behind that. And the thought was to retain as much of that landscape into the front as possible. So this is again a view looking down along Church Street, down towards the junction with the A140. This is the footway going to be on this right-hand side here. And just looking back at the point of the access. So this is the point of access looking back to the east and then to the west. And then that's the point of access looking into the site itself. So currently undeveloped site. You can see there are some boundary features around the site boundaries, which will help to screen some of the development. Additional landscaping is proposed as part of the works. Then that's within the site itself, looking back towards the access, and you can start to see some of these bunds that exist. That's the bund that exists adjacent to the existing built development, and that's one of the bunds that would sit on the western boundary of the site itself. I think this photograph's taken from on top of that bund, looking across the existing meadow and the A140 that just sits in a slight lower level at that point there. And then just some existing images. You see the form of development here, very similar to the form that I showed on the photographs. This landscape bund is to be removed to facilitate, I think units 2 and 4, I think, are going in that position there, and then allowing a connection through to the existing roadway and the road system serving the existing commercial development. And then that'll be the area of the wider development itself to have all the built form contained within this sort of area here related to the existing built form itself, which we feel works fairly successfully. That's just some images of the existing buildings. We're in the area here now, which is the called the enhancement zone. So this is the area that's going to be used for some of the ecological enhancements and surface water drainage. So there's no built form going in this area here, and that's some of the nearest residential properties on the northeastern boundary of the application site. But there's some distance from the proposed built form. I can show you those when we get onto the slide at the end. And then just some more details from within the site. So this one shows the landscaping scheme. So we've got landscaping on that boundary, on the western boundary here, additional landscaping on that enlarged bund. And then I mentioned about the enlarged ecological area. That's part of it. And there's another part just to the north of that, which should be on one of these other slides. Yeah, here we are. So the built form's going in here, drainage primarily into this area. And then as a result of the county ecologist requests for areas for reptiles, and great crested newts, this area here is to be given over to some of the more natural sort of ecological enhancements. I believe one of those photographs was one of these properties over this side here. So they won't necessarily be affected by the built development, but it is next to the application site. So I need to show you that. And then that's the final slide, just giving the context of the proposals and the site. So I'll probably leave that one on just while I go through the verbal sort of updates. Details of the proposals are all set out within section 1 of your report, which gives details of the sizes of the buildings and a more detailed description of the proposals. In respect of consultations and representations, these are all as reported. I have no updates to give on that. The supplementary schedule does, however, set out the revisions that are necessary due to the publication of the revised NPPF, which came out in earlier this month. So there's some updates in there, and it really is just changing some of the paragraph numbers that are referred to within the original report. Some of the paragraph numbers have changed, and that's just a reference within the supplementary schedule to those changes. And also a note to say that the outstanding reports in relation to drainage and ecology are due to be submitted by the end of August, and then our officers will obviously undertake further consultation on those, which is why the recommendation is for delegated authority. But just working through the report itself, issues for consideration are the principle of development, impacts on the character and appearance of the area, on heritage assets, on residential amenity, ecology, drainage and flood risk, and on highway safety. The site is located outside of the settlement limit, but the main part of the site has been allocated under policy HNF3 of the Site Allocations DPD for employment uses. It's noted that part of the site is located outside of that allocation, which is largely due to the formation of drainage lagoons and the necessary ecological mitigation, which also incorporates the remodelling and landscaping of Existingbunds to the northeast, as well as landscaping and Existingbund along the western boundary. Therefore, due to the increased size of the site compared to the allocation, the proposals are strictly contrary to the allocation of the development plan, and the report assesses whether there are material considerations that warrant granting permission. In terms of character and appearance of the area, there will be an inevitable change as a result of these proposals. However, the additional tree and hedgerow planting, the landscaping on the earth bunds, and the ecological enhancements in time will ensure that the character and appearance of the wider area is preserved. There are a number of heritage assets which are described in the report, and the proposed built development is set away from these. The comments of Historic England and the Council's Senior Heritage and Design Officer are noted, and it is considered that the setting and significance of the listed buildings will be preserved. The proposed 3-metre wide footway cycleway to the southeast part of the site frontage, this part here, is within the conservation area. But it's considered that the positive contribution that this area makes to the conservation area will be preserved due to the deep sort of landscaping and open space part of that site. So we feel that the provision and the formation of that footway wouldn't have those negative impacts. Overall, the impact is considered to be less than substantial, and the NPPF requires this to be weighed against the public benefits arising from the proposal, which in this case will be the employment benefits, the extension of the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, which is coming up to the point of the new access, and the provision of the roadside footway and cycleways. The proposal meets the tests, therefore, of Section 66 and 72 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 and Para 202 of the revised NPPF. The proposals are not considered to have an unacceptable impact on residential amenities, and in respect of the impact on the proposals on ecology, The initial comments received from the county ecologist were noted, and further surveys for great crested newts and reptiles carried out. The mitigation required for these has necessitated the enlargement of the application site, which is what I showed you, that area that's now been brought into the site, which previously wasn't. So that area has now been included within the site to allow those necessary mitigations. It's noted that a revised ecology report is to be submitted, and as noted in the supplementary schedule, this is to be submitted by the end of August, and therefore this matter is a delegated authority being sought to allow the ecology issues to be resolved before the decision is issued. In the same way, the drainage and flood risk issues are also still being worked upon. The LLFA has requested further clarification for ground permeability and the design of a suitable drainage strategy for surface water runoff from these proposals. These details are also to be submitted by the end of August, and further consultation with the LLFA will follow from that. This is also a matter that's a delegated authority sought to allow the drainage issues to be resolved before a decision is issued. Turning to the highway issue, finally, the Highway Authority are content with the position and layout of the proposed access, but requested that the 3 metre wide combined footway, which has been proposed to this point here, they requested that be provided across the frontage of the site right the way up to the proposed new access. The proposal is to provide only a 1.5 metre wide footpath between the existing and proposed accesses, and this allows the existing landscaping on the site frontage to be retained. It is considered that this is appropriate in this case, and that a continuous 3 metre wide combined footway and cycleway would impact the existing roadside landscaping and is not necessary to make the development acceptable. Car parking provision is considered to comply with policy TS4 of the DMDPD. In conclusion, although the main part of the site has been allocated for commercial purposes, and these are proposed, the application site as revised extends beyond the land that has been allocated due to the need to create the space for the drainage and ecological mitigation. It is therefore contrary to the development plan policies and also noting the objection from the Highway Authority. However, the report identifies that there are material considerations in this case that warrant a positive recommendation, which outweighs the modest harms that have been identified. Therefore, the recommendation remains to delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Planning to approve the application, subject to no adverse comments being received from the County Ecologist and LLFA to the further details to be submitted, and subject to the conditions listed on pages 31 to 32 of your agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew for clarity? Councillor Karim?
Matthew, you said about the new entrance. Is that a one-way entrance? Does it go all the way around and come out the other side?
No, it's intended to be an access and egress, so vehicles can come in and come out of that access, but it is possible. So, if a vehicle was delivering or was working in, say, for instance, Block 3, but also needed to do deliveries, then they could make that manoeuvre through the site and come out that way. But there is the potential for a vehicle to come in and come out of the new access. Okay,
I was just a bit concerned about the distance from that entrance to the A140. How far away is that? I know they turn in from the A140 and then they start speeding up that road.
Well, you see the A140 just coming onto your slide there. It's not fully on that slide. That's something the Highway Authority have had regard to. One thing that's in the report I didn't really mention other than right in the summary, there is a proposal that the speed limit currently is 30 miles an hour to about this point. That's to be extended to somewhere around here. That hasn't been defined whether that's exactly at that point or this point, but the 30 mile per hour speed limit will be extended to deal with that issue of cars accelerating into the village. That won't happen because the 30 mile per hour has been extended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beadle?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points again on the access, the new access, and particularly between the two access to the new one and the old one. I noticed that the highways are suggesting that there should be a continuation of the joint cycle footway, and you say, or I argue that it should only be a footpath. Could you flesh out the reasoning behind why you disagree with what we would normally regard as the people who are expertise in these areas? And the other question on a similar vein is there's no planned protection to that hedge because in your presentation you did say it may stay, it may go. It's quite a wide grass verge there. I'm just wondering why there's any doubt why it may go. You know, I would have thought it could have stayed except for any visibility split.
Yeah, if I move this down a little bit, you might see it a little bit better. If I can keep hold of it. Yeah. So yeah, you've got the roadside hedge, but behind that, you've got this sort of landscaping section through here. I think that what we were looking to achieve was trying to keep this as much of a landscape frontage as possible, rather than it becoming quite an engineered appearance to the end of some of these units. That's why we wanted to try and retain as much of this landscaping in here as possible. The combination of the speed limit being reduced means that obviously traffic's going to not be moving, coming along the road as quickly as they would do currently. And it was seen that cyclists, if they were cycling to the site, could still do that within the carriageway and have a benefit of a footway within the site. So yeah, that was the reason, really, trying to retain as much of that landscape frontage as possible, and having a 3 metre wide footway cycleway would put some of that under pressure for removal, which is what we didn't want to happen, really.
Councillor Hempsall?
Thank you, Chairman. My question is around the policy side of the need to make this site larger. Now, from the way I understand it, is that allocations are given to accommodate certain types of development in their entirety. So, to me, this site, as it is, should accommodate the business side of it, to include any ecological mitigation and drainage. So I don't quite understand, how is it that one element encroaching outside of the development line is deemed acceptable? So my question ultimately is, did the conversations take place as to contract the size of the development to include all elements that are required to support this development within the allocation?
Insofar as that, I think what I would say is that only as part of the details of the plan and application have we got into the details of the requirements for the ecological surveys and the detailed requirements around that. If we were to be including the ecological enhancements within the site, I'm trying to find the slide that I put up, which this one here shows the area of land that's been identified for the ecological enhancements, and you can see the area that takes up would pretty much wipe out the development in here. So you'd only have 2 or 3 units, and it therefore wouldn't make that a viable proposition for the development to come forward. The surface water drainage, again, looking at the details of that, LLFA are still looking at that in relation to the ground permeability, and there's areas of the site that they consider, areas of the extended site, they consider are more appropriate for ground permeability than the development site itself. So on that basis, that's why an area has been identified to almost an extended area to facilitate some of those associated elements. But the size of the area and trying to get the maximum amount of ecological enhancement would reduce the development site so significantly that the development wouldn't continue. It wouldn't be worth their while doing. We do have the agent for the application speaking, and maybe I'll just pick up on some of those more detailed aspects. But that's my assessment of it, that the necessary ecological assessments and drainage works take up so much space and the site allocation, I've got on this screen here, but it was pretty much just this area here. It would mean that you're losing at least half of the development. So rather than 7 units, you'd have 2 or 3, which obviously viability wise would make that less likely to come forward. But yeah,
Of course.
So Matthew, were these issues not identified at the allocation stage? Because clearly, has policy in terms of what is necessary for ecological mitigation for the drainage, or has that arisen since that allocation was made?
how it normally works is insofar as the allocation, the identified, so what we would do, and I think there we go, on page 25 of your report, it says a sustainable drainage system should be provided. No details were obviously worked up at that stage to identify to what extent that would be required. Let's see what it says about, doesn't mention ecology, I don't think, in there. Talks about site investigation. The site contains a historic environment record, therefore further investigation is likely to be required in respect of archaeology, but doesn't mention about ecology. So on that basis, it probably wasn't evident that the site had great crested newts present on the site or reptiles present on the site, and therefore it's only since the details of the application have come in that has been more closely looked at. At the allocation stage, that's probably not, do you agree, Helen? That's not looked at in that level of detail, really.
No, it would appear. I mean, I haven't seen the detail and background to know what those conversations were, but clearly the applicant has sought to look to provide a new use on the allocated site, but because of the site requirements, which ecology, as Matthew has said, is not included in the policy, then it's looking at that best use of land and how can that be accommodated within the site and outside of the site. So Matthew's quite right. You could have had a smaller scale development and try to mitigate it, but it probably wouldn't come forward. Or you can maximise the site and look to see, we made it very clear it's contrary to policy. That's why it's before you today. And is that additionality acceptable or not to you? So that's what we're looking at today, in your officer's opinion, actually to bring the site forward as allocated to accommodate it. And I don't think we were thinking that only half the site was going to come forward with all the on-site that may or may not have been required. We are looking at other measures, and clearly there isn't that much built form on the actual allocated site, and the measures outside of the site are low impact in as far as the drainage and the ecology. And the ecology is welcome, and the scale of that is welcome as a material consideration to grant it contrary to policy.
Thank you, Helen. Does that help, Lana?
It explains where we are right now. It doesn't mean that, I question the allocation now. If it's not a viable plot as it stands, an error was clearly made at the plan making stage. If it's not a viable proposition, and we know what happens to sites that are not viable, they get returned into the pot and something else gets allocated where it is viable. So, but that's beyond the scope of this planning committee meeting, Chairman, I accept that.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Councillor Adams?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This has been touched upon by 2 of my fellow councillors, but I'm not at all satisfied that when it comes to the cycleway stroke footpath, that we're actually meeting the objectives of the MPPF, especially the one on promoting sustainable transport. And 102C says opportunities to promote walking, cycling and public transport use are identified and pursued. I'm not exactly sure that we have pursued satisfactorily the fact that we're not necessarily promoting either walking or cycling because the footpath isn't wide enough. And it also says on 103, the planning system should actively manage patterns of growth in support of these objectives. So although I agree overall, Chairman, that this is a valid application, I do have concerns about this footpath and cycleway. And given the fact that we've heard that the verge is quite wide, that I can't see by extending it by 1.5 metres is going to impact upon any of the current hedges or whatever that is there already.
Okay.
Chairman.
If I can just come back on that, that's a really, I mean, that's the balance officers have made. Just to clarify, the footpath will be extended. It's that additional width of creating a cycleway that will impact on the landscaping. So we've made that balance of actually we're giving greater weight to retaining more of the existing landscape to providing the cycleway. If members are happy to see more of the landscaping lost to provide that cycleway, then that's the decision you have to make. So we've made that balance in this case, but clearly you could make a different balance in respect of the application, more loss of landscaping to provide the cycleway. We've made it really clear that's the reason why we're saying we're just accepting a footpath link in this case.
Okay. Okay, any other questions?
Sorry, Chair.
You okay?
Item 5.14, it says an amended ecology report has been prepared and it will be submitted, hopefully submitted by the end of July 19th. Has that been submitted?
No, as I said, within the supplementary, there's an update to that, the ecology report and the drainage report are now to be submitted the end of August. So we're still awaiting those details. And as I said, that's why we're delegating authority at this stage, or recommending delegated authority, to allow members to consider it today and then go forward to resolving those outstanding ecology and drainage issues.
Is it fair for the planning committee to have to make a decision today when we haven't got those two reports to see?
Well, what we have said in the report is that neither of them are considered to be, what should we say, non-negotiable. Both parties, the ecologist and the LLFA, have said that it's can be resolved. It will be resolved. They just need the details to identify the further works required. And that's partly the reason why we've given that additional area into the application site to facilitate those requirements. So we're not restricted by a smaller site area that can't accommodate all those elements. By getting the enlarged application site, that gives us the flexibility to provide those additional drainage and ecological enhancements that are going to be required. But neither of them, and it says within the report, neither parties have said that these are impossible or can't be resolved. They're confident they can be resolved. They just need the details and to take that forward.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just add to that, Chairman? Because I think if we couldn't resolve those with those two statutory bodies, we would have to bring it back to you. So it's only if we resolve it with those two bodies as part of outlined in the recommendation.
Yeah, they're part of the conditions of the recommendation as well. Okay, if that's everybody. Georgina, your 5 minutes. What we'll do, I'll give you a 1 minute warning if you get to that point of when the 5 minutes is going to run out.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
I had actually got a speech prepared for today, but I think given the questions that have been arisen, I'm just going to scrap that and just try and respond to some of the questions that have been raised by members. So if I may, I'll just start with the Highway Authority comments. And prior to the submission of this planning application, we have actually undertaken pre-application consultation with the Highway Authority and the local planning authority and the local community. In terms of the local highway authority and the requirement for footway and cycleway provision, as part of the pre-application response we got from them, they did only require the footway and cycleway for the first section of the development scheme, and then just a footway after that to provide to the new access proposal. So this scheme actually fully meets what they originally requested as part of our pre-application consultation with them. It's only once we had subsequent discussions, once the application had gone in, did a different officer then say, oh, actually, can we consider providing the cycleway to extend it up to the new access? And as raised by planning officers here today, the reason for that is because Abbey Farm Commercial Park, that one of the main characteristics about it is its really attractive landscape setting when you come into the village. And in order for us to extend that cycleway, we would have to therefore remove the majority of the hedgerow and the trees, a lot of the trees along that section. And that's why we've been quite resistant to do that. And we just didn't think it was necessary, given that people would use the proposed cycleway for the first section. And then if they are on their bike, they're likely to then access the commercial park from the existing access point and then travel through the site to get to those new business units. And as members have clearly said today, there is still going to be a 1.5 5-metre wide footway that will still continue to the new access point. So we do feel like we addressed the comments that we had, and we do feel on balance that in this case, given the landscaping, the attractive landscape environment of Abbey Farm, that this is the right way forward for that element. Just picking up as well, the Highway Authority haven't raised any objections to the scheme on highway safety grounds, and as mentioned previously, we are looking to extend the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit to improve the position as well. Just I think moving on to the ecology matter that has been raised. Yes, the ecology is now proposed as a receptor site, which is outside of the allocated area. I would say that this is quite a common thing for schemes, both commercial and residential. And I don't know of this council, but I know of other councils where they have their own receptor sites where developers will translocate reptiles and ecology from their site onto an alternative site. In this instance, we don't have to do that because we've got the added benefit of having land immediately adjacent to the development site that we are able to use. And in my view, that is the best approach rather than translocating them to somewhere else. So I think that is quite common practice that we would do that. We have prepared an updated ecology report and it is ready to submit to the council. But because we're still waiting for the drainage report and in a way they are linked, we took the view that we would submit them together at the same time. And that's why that hasn't been submitted before you today. Just a couple of other things just to say that where the development is being proposed, it is allocated within both the adopted and also the emerging local plan. And actually the emerging local plan is looking to actually extend that area slightly further to the north of Block L. And we have looked to repeat the design of Block L, which was consented in 2012 for the new development, which we think is appropriate in this location. Obviously, there are lots of benefits to the proposal in terms of job creation, and we think this would be a welcome benefit to this part of the North and Norwich area. I'm happy to answer any more questions you have. Thank you for the time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Any questions for the public speaker? No? Okay, thank you very much, Georgina. Over to you, councillors. Councillor Adams?
Yes, Chairman. Taking everything into consideration, I am prepared to move the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's no other discussion. We have a proposal. Sorry, Councillor Hempsel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You weren't kidding when you said we were going to finish by a certain time. But what I'd like to add is my concerns are in relation to the drainage in particular. The extension of the site is deemed to be is considered to be acceptable in planning terms, enough for us to accept because of the public benefit of this particular application. My issue is that the details of the drainage strategy that we're still waiting for could prove to be really expensive. And my concern is, and I need assurances from officers, that if we get a return verdict that the drainage strategy is going to be really, really, really expensive, and negotiations begin to take place on where does the public benefit now have to give way to this, that this is brought back to the committee rather than negotiating this to within an inch of its life, where it just about passes what the spirit of what we would consider acceptable today.
I'm not aware that there is an issue with if the drainage comes forward as being suggested that it's going to make the scheme unviable. So we would look to then have an acceptable scheme and condition that. If the scheme can then not be implemented as per the approved plans, which you see before us today, then it would have to come back in a different form and a different discharge of condition. So that's how we would address it in normal terms. So we would be giving consent for what we've got before us, subject to the agreement of the lead local flood authority and the ecologist. If that can't be implemented as we've approved, with the balances that we have made, then it would have to come back as an amended application.
Thank you.
The recommendation is subject to the agreement of the legal drainage authority, so that would be what would be in the minutes. And the scheme approved as per the scheme before us, which is also a condition on your papers. So a scheme always has a condition that's attached to it to say implemented in accordance with the approved scheme.
Chairman, with respect, I think that particular clarification in terms of the viability, because public benefit always ends up being on the receiving end of viability discussions. So I think it's important that the officer's comments are minuted for our record, not as part of the decision notice, clearly.
We're live streamed as well, Lana, so everything is recorded.
Okay. For clarity, Chairman, the recording is just for backup. The only official record of this meeting are the actual minutes, which we get to receive, or you get to receive next meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, on that note, we have been proposed by Councillor Evans and seconded by Councillor Folgers. All those in favour of officer's recommendation?
Unanimous, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you very much. That concludes item 1. Okay, moving on to item 2 is plot 16B, Peachman Way, Broadland Business Park. Over to you, Matthew.
Yep, thank you, Chairman. So once again, start with the description, page 34. So this is to use the northern part of the site as a storage yard in association with the hire of equipment, with the erection of a building to facilitate the hire business, provision of hardcore finish on the southern part of the application site, fencing, external lighting, gates, vehicle wash bay, recycle area and cycle stands, realignment of the existing access and amendment to standard operating hours. And this application is reported to committee as the recommendation to approve is contrary to the development plan. Just going through the slides. So this is the application site itself, Peachman Way running through Broadland Business Park, comes up to around about here. This is the macro building, so those that are familiar with the business park may get their reference from that, and the car parking area between the macro building and Peachman Way. The proposal, obviously this site here is proposed to be accessed off of a small little spine road, which actually runs through to, I think it's a driving test centre, which is the building in this position here. So that's the context of the site, with obviously commercial buildings primarily around it to the south, an office building to the north, railway running down sort of in the distant western boundary, and the Dustindale housing development beyond that. Taken into the overhead slide, so you can see the arrangement of some of the existing buildings around the site, and as I mentioned, the parking area and the driving test centre, which runs immediately along the boundary to the western boundary of the site itself. Going in a little bit closer once more, you can see the arrangements. So currently undeveloped plot of land. There is an existing access that's marked here, I think, as part of the proposals. Yeah, realignment to existing access. So I think that's to be repositioned slightly, but still coming off of this spine road here. But you can see the context of the site visible to the Peachman Way boundary and around the roundabout and the spine road. Within the site itself, so this is looking within the site back towards the building. You can see the boundary features, the hedgerow that started to establish between the site and the driving test centre on that slide. And then views to the south, again, boundary features starting to establish itself and the scale of the existing buildings around it. And this proposal very much sort of fits in with that kind of two-storey form, which you can see here on these surrounding buildings. That's the building to the north, which I believe is the office building. And then these are the arrangements of the proposals. So access coming in off of the spine road at this point here, parking areas for obviously customers and staff towards that northern part of the site, the building itself, which sits here parallel to the Peachman Way roadway, and then the area here, which is for the open storage of items and plant that's to be hired for business. The other thing this plan shows is area of landscaping, a 5 metre landscape buffer, which is running along the northern, the eastern and the southern boundaries. There is also a proposal to provide security fencing. I think it's probably this line on the inside of this line here, which is obviously to secure the site and secure the premises and items stored out in the open. So moving through those, that's the arrangement of the building itself. Sort of clad materials, a little bit of corporate colour, but again, that's something that is fairly consistent across the rest of the commercial business park. And then some photos of the site itself. So this is a view looking across the roundabout. The application site is this area here. So the proposed building would be sitting in about that orientation, running parallel with Peachman Way. Site entrance coming up off of here, and that's that driving test building in the background there. Just some views from the access, from the roundabout entrance. And then that's just the access into the site itself coming off of that spine road, and you can see the other buildings in the context of the site. And the view looking back towards macro site within itself. This is within the development site itself. And the view from the southern boundary looking back towards the site. So again, once again, the building would be in this sort of position here relative to the boundaries. Notice the street lighting that already exists on obviously the road itself, but also some of the surrounding plots. I'll leave that one on just so I go through the presentation. So details of the proposals, once again, set out in section 1 of your report, giving details of the size of the building and all aspects of the proposals. Consultations and representations, these are as reported. There are no updates to give and no revisions to the report necessary due to the publication of the revised NPPF. Issues for consideration are the principle of development and the impacts on the character and appearance of the area, on drainage, on flood risk and highway safety. The site is located inside the settlement limit and within the Broadland Business Park, which has been allocated for employment uses under policy TSA1 of the Site Allocations DPD. The permitted uses within this policy are classes B1, B2 and B8, which are offices, light industrial, research and development, general industrial, storage and distribution. It's considered that the proposed use of this site as a commercial hire business does not neatly fit into these categories and is a sui generis use, which is a term for a use which is in a class of its own and therefore does not comply with the requirements of policy TSA1, the reason for reporting to members today. In terms of the impact on the character and appearance of the area, the proposed building would be of a similar design and external finish to other commercial buildings on surrounding plots, so is not considered to be at odds with that established form. The storage area. I'm back on. Is that okay? The storage area will be a large area of hard standing that will be visible until the proposed landscape into the boundaries becomes established. It's noted that a 2.4 metre high green weld mesh fence is to be erected around the site perimeter, which will also be apparent until the landscaping becomes established. There are 8 10-metre high floodlight columns proposed, but it's noted that other units in the locality of the site have floodlights as well as the street lights, so these will not appear as discordant features. Surface water drainage proposals have now been designed, which meets the requirements of the LLFA and policy CSU5 of the DMDPD. In terms of highway safety, the Highway Authority have raised no objection, but requested that the access gates be set back 20 metres from the roadway to enable large vehicles to manoeuvre into the site without having to wait on the highway. The applicant was unwilling to make this change for operational reasons and is suggesting that the gates are left open during trading hours. This is considered to be a reasonable compromise and a condition is worded within the list before you. In conclusion, although the proposed use does not neatly fit with the requirements of policy TSA1, as it is a sui generis use, it is considered to be complementary to the existing uses of the commercial business park, and it will contribute to the local economy by providing 22 full-time jobs and supports the construction industry through its plant and equipment hire. It is therefore considered to be an acceptable use within this locality on the business park, and the recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions listed on page 41 of your agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you, Matthew. Helen,
Can I just add one correction? I think Matt was going to mention paragraph 5.8 of the report. Just needed amended, which we will add as an addition to our supplementary schedule. It was missed off our schedule of updates. So we just need to update on paragraph 5.8, and I'll just let Matt do that.
Yeah, apologies. I wrote that on the top and everything, and then I forgot about it. So yeah, there's a correction at paragraph 5.8 where it incorrectly references a pharmacy. There's no pharmacy as part of this development. I think that might have crept in on an earlier report. This should now read, paragraph 5.8, that the proposal will have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the site and the surrounding area, and complies with policy 2 of the JCS and policy GC4I of the DMDPD. Yeah, apologies for that.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for clarity? Councillor Hempsall and Councillor Karimi.
I know, it's been a while. Can I just ask, this is obviously an operation for plant hire. Where does the plant cleaning facility take place? Because that doesn't seem to be in the report or in the description of this anywhere, but surely if you rent stuff out, it comes back dirty, usually.
Okay.
Yes, on the description, it talks about provision of hardcore finish on the southern part of the application site. So I'm assuming that will be that area there where the hardcore finish, where the washdown would take place, beyond that hardcore area, where water could then run down off of the machinery and things like that. So that would be on this southern part here. But that hasn't been an issue through the application. As I said, the LLFA have looked at the proposals. I think they've requested further details, and through the report, they've now, so page 39 of your report, LLFA initially objected primarily on the grounds of inadequate information in relation to drainage. Small section of the site towards the corner, south of the surface water flooding. So there's an area of the site that's subject to surface water flooding. It's intended to divert surface water to a cellular crate system underneath the hard standing to the south of the building, that area there, before being discharged via a controlled release. Based on the further information being submitted, the LLFA withdrew its objection. So the LLFA have looked at surface water drainage and are happy, given the crate system that's being provided, that they no longer raise objections, and that's acceptable to them and meets policy CSU 5. So contained within the site.
Okay, so Matthew, that still doesn't address this. Surface water relates to whatever drops out of the sky and has to, hits a hard surface and has to drain away in a different way. That doesn't include additional water that is used to wash wheels, wash vehicles, etc., which has, additionality to it, including contamination. So if that's not part of the proposal, is that something we're going to explicitly allow on site? Or should that operation be carried out elsewhere?
That's covered in condition 3, Lana, foul water drainage strategy to be submitted. That's not
foul.
That wouldn't be covered.
No, it says there's condition 4, implementation of a surface water drainage strategy. I think the only thing to do is to check whether that covers the, like I said, the washdown. If it doesn't, we'll add another condition to deal with that, to deal with the washdown area and ensure that that's covered and connected into the surface water crate system.
Do you want that conditioned, Lana? Do you want to do that now?
I think first of all we need to find out from the applicant if that's going to be part of the operation or not. Because if it isn't, then there's no point putting a condition in because it's not necessary. But if it is, then it clearly needs to be there. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that this needs to be consulted on because it's not just to do with the LLFA, but with Anglian Water to know what is going into the into the drainage system, what's being washed away. We had a similar issue when a petrol station was proposed. It's like, is the wash off from the forecourt going to go in just a normal drainage that ends up in Whitlingham and then recycled? And there was clearly a discomfort with Anglian Water said, well, that wasn't really considered. So, I would go as far as to say that if that is part of the proposal, that needs a separate consultation.
Okay, thank you.
We can put a condition on whether or not it needs additional consultation. We can look at that, but it depends on whether that facility is going on there. And it is not unusual to have details of any on-site washing facilities to be submitted to and agreed. And as part of that condition, we consult with the relevant body. So that could be done by way of condition.
Lana, happy? Okay. Councillor Karimi?
Mine's a bit more easier, I think. The 5 metre boundary around the site, can we put a condition that some trees are planted there just to soften the fencing and everything?
Sorry, were you addressing Matt? I was just...
Sorry.
Matthew?
Yeah, I was looking insofar as the conditions. It says in accordance with submitted drawings. I haven't looked at the details of the landscaping to see whether we've got that level of detail within the landscaping submission. There's no other condition specific to the landscaping.
It's quite a flat area and it would be nice to have a few trees there to sort of soften it a bit.
Again, I think what I'll do is I'll check with the case officer to see whether the details of submitted have got sufficient information within them. If they are, then that's why condition 2 would be covered by condition 2 in accordance with submitted drawings, because we've had the landscaping details. But if he feels that needs to be elaborated upon, then we can condition a landscaping scheme within an additional condition, if that's agreeable.
Thanks, Matthew.
Councillor Brennan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Matthew, I'm just a little bit confused with the site layout, with this boundary to the east and the southern side. We have what appears to be a landlocked area, because the large rectangular area that you can see is actually used by the DVSA for motorcycle testing, and that's completely fenced off. So what is the purpose of this narrow band going around, which locks off that sort of almost small rectangular area?
You talked about this area here. So this is the proposal itself, and the red line of the application site. You're right; it does just include that sort of landscape strip rather than this building in here. Does it say ownership boundary outside application area? I don't have any details as to what that area is intended for, whether that's potentially retained for future expansion, that's not subject to this application and could be coming forward under a further application, possibly, whether they're looking for another building in the future, maybe. I don't have any information on that, but other than to say there's nothing proposed on that area. The red line, as you rightly say, sort of skirts around that area, picks up the landscaping on the southern boundary, and then the eastern boundary. That area has been left excluded from this development. Any subsequent proposals or development proposals required would need another application, and if necessary would be reported back to committee.
Right, so that parcel is under the same ownership, is it?
Yes. It's outlined in blue, and blue indicates it's within the ownership of the applicant but not forming part of this application.
Yeah, thank you, because that's not particularly clear on the pad. Yeah, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. Helen, do you want to pick up on the...
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy. I mean, as Matthew's outlined and as raised by Councillor Hemsall, the car washing is clearly part of the the vehicle wash bay area is clearly part of the proposal. So we will add an additional condition. Details of any on-site washing facilities shall be submitted and agreed with the council before the development commences, in consultation with the lead local flood authority and Anglian Water if appropriate. So we will make sure that is added as a condition. And with respect to the landscaping point, if the landscaping isn't covered within the submitted drawings details, we will add an additional condition to be added, but we will do that whether that's needed or not.
Okay. Councillor Folger?
So thank you, Chairman. In the light of the information which we've been given, I'd like to move that we accept the officer's recommendation on that, this include the comments just made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No. Okay. Well, it's been proposed and seconded that we go with officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Lovely. Thank you very much. That's carried. It's
Chair, can I-
10:35.
Yeah.
Anyone want
Yeah,
5 minutes? Okay, we're just 5 minutes, everybody. Moving on to item 3, Burgate Solar Farm Fields adjoining Spixworth Road, Hainford. If Mr. Dossett, could you identify yourself, sir? Thank you. And Mr. Shaw and Mr. Woods. And I know you, Mr. Roper. Okay. Over to you, Matthew.
Okay, item 3, page 43 of your agenda. This is an application for a ground-mounted solar photovoltaic PV farm, along with continued agricultural use, ancillary infrastructure, security fencing, landscape and provision, ecological enhancements and associated works. This application is reported to committee as the application has been called in by Councillor Roper for the determination by the planning committee for the reasons given in section 4 of your report. So going through the slides, this is the identification of the application site itself, identified in this sort of pinky colour in the middle of your screen here. What we wanted to do here was also set the context of where this is relative to the surrounding settlement. So we've got sort of main built-up village of Hainford to the north, Newton St Faith to the west, Horsham St Faith to the southwest, and Spixworth to the south, Frettenham over here to the east. That's probably everything on that slide. Then moving in a little bit more closely, site outlined in red here. Once again, picking up on the roads this time. So we've got the site access into the corner of the solar farm here off of Spixworth Road. Spixworth Road comes down to this point here where it meets Buxton Road. We've also then got Newton Road, which comes into this area, which links Newton St Faith and Hainford to the north, and Lady Road, which runs sort of east-west in that configuration there. There's also reference in the report to a couple of footpaths in the area, and they're referred to as footpath 1 and footpath 2. Footpath 1 is the purple line here, which comes in probably the nearest point at this position here. There's a little beck that runs down between the two, so a little sort of valley bottom at that point there. So footpath 1 then continues and picks up and comes into Newton St Faith at that point, and footpath 2 is set a little bit further away next to it, runs through Middle Farm and then picks up and comes down further down to the south there. So gives you a little bit of a context as to the site and the surroundings. Each one of these little yellow triangles is a viewpoint that's picked up within the landscape visual impact assessment. Got some photographs of that as we go through the presentation. So views from close to the site, obviously around the site boundaries, but some further views picking up from the footpaths, but also the wider surroundings. So this is the red line of the application site. The reason it's got sort of cutaway section here is because we've got 2 residential properties in the centre there. On the next slide, we've got all the residential property names to give you your bearings there. But then this is then, again, picking up on the earlier point, Councillor Brennan, blue land within the application's ownership, but not forming part of the application site. So there is some surrounding land that's not forming part of the application site. And then that's that little beck that I mentioned that runs sort of just to the to the west of the site boundaries. These are the surrounding neighbouring properties. I mentioned the 2 properties in this sort of central area here. So we've got 2 properties there, property 4 Sticks and Oak Dean. To the north, we've got a property known as the Studio. Then off of Newton Road here, Burgate Hill, Beach Hill, and Beckfield further to the south, pretty much sort of diagonally opposite the site entrance. Site entrance is about this position here. You've got a property called the Poultry Farm, and I've got some photographs of each of those properties later on through the presentation. This is the arrangement of the proposals themselves. So obviously the blue horizontal lines are the lines of the solar panels. Once again, the site entrance in this position here. The sort of substation, battery storage unit and storage building are set over on this far western boundary. I think care has been taken to try and locate those away from, as much as possible, some of these neighbouring properties. And as I said, you've got the beck down here, so there's no residential neighbours in that proximity. There are 2 inverter cabinets set in this position here, which are towards the boundary with that neighbouring property, but the neighbouring property is set towards the Spixworth Road frontage, got a long rear garden and associated land. So once again, reference in the report to the relationship in relation to noise receptors and that kind of thing. Then a further inverter set further up on the northern boundary here. Once again, they're the neighbouring properties on Newton Road, which I referred to. There is a feature through here for a sort of a deer corridor, so that the site's not entirely enclosed. There is a connection through here. When I was on my site visit, you could see sort of footprints, deer footprints and things like that. So they must be in the area, and that's an ability for them to continue through the site without being excluded from the whole area of the site itself. Image of the panels, probably can't quite see that, but it shows 3 metre maximum height, 80 centimetre clearance on the ground level there. And then these are some of the images of the cabinets, so inverter cabinets, 5 in total across the site. Dimensions given on there, I think that's about 3.5 metres, I think. Let me just zoom in a little bit so I can read that, sorry. No, 3 metres, sorry. 3 metres and 2.8 metres wide, 7 metres long. And then this is the substation building, which is located over on that far western boundary. The reason that's over on that boundary is because that's where the connection point is, and I can show you that in a moment. This is a battery storage unit, which is a longer building, but still only sort of 3 metres high. And again, that's over on the western boundary. Proposed deer fencing around the site. So this is 1.8 metres high. Once again, with a little bit of clearance underneath to allow smaller animals to get underneath that hedge, so they're not restricted by movement. They can still get in and out of the site underneath that fence. Just an image of the site gates of the site entrance, 2.8 metres high. Cameras, I need to just drop that down a little bit so you can see. 3 metre high CCTV cameras, which are located around the boundaries of the site. Obviously facing into the development for security reasons, which is fairly standard for these kind of things. We've had proposals before for solar farms, and they require these CCTV cameras. This image here, I mentioned about the substation, and that's located over on the western boundary of the site. So this plan here, as I move in a little bit closer, you start to see the context of that. This green line is the overhead power cable that runs in that line. This is the blue line here is trying to pick up the application site itself. That's why the substation and battery storage units are all over on that western boundary, just to pick up the proximity and the connection to the overhead power line. This is again, identification as to land quality. So the light green is grade 3 land. Got a more detailed plan of that next, which is this one here. Again, I probably just need to close that down a bit. There you go. When we've had these proposals in the past, members will recall there's consideration of best and most versatile agricultural land. Best and most versatile is grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3A. So in this case, that northern section of the site is grade 3A, and the remainder of the site is grade 3B. Insofar as, I was going to talk about that later on, but while I've got that plan in front of us, we can see that 29% of the site is 3A, 71% of the site is grade 3B. That's an issue that's come up on previous schemes, but and I'll refer to that in the assessment when I go through that assessment section. Once again, that's a slide that just picks up on the viewpoints. I think we're now going to run through some of those. So this is viewpoint 1, which is noted by the star here. So this is the southern point of the site. Spixworth Road, which is the vehicular access to the site, is just on your screen there to the right. And we're looking through here towards the application site itself. I think the next one shows, yeah, so this is the view with the solar panels that would be visible in year 1. But by the time that hedge has grown up by year 15, obviously the solar panels have been screened from that particular viewpoint. And obviously that is looking across, it's not immediately at this entrance point here. That's the field to the south. So that's not the access into the site. We've got a photo of that later on. And then the officer dealing with this was conscious. Obviously, the application was being brought to you at a time when trees are in full leaf. So that's that same view in the winter time when you can see some of the planting in the foreground has obviously lost its leaves. Trees at the back there, obviously without their leaves, and the difference that makes. But in that particular context, with that, obviously that's taken in full leaf when you can see the difference between the landscaping and the hedgerows at that point. Viewpoint 2, so this is from the northern part of the site. I think the vehicular access into the site is a little bit further down the road here, actually. But you can see there's a good amount of landscaping and established boundary treatments to the roadside along that part of Spixworth Road, which is taken at this northern part of the site there. This is a view from Lady Lane, which runs along the top part of beyond the application site being here. We've got a couple of intervening fields. So the views from Lady Lane, there's a little mound, so it's not visible at all from that viewpoint in both winter and summer. And this is a view from Newton Road. People that know that road, sort of quite a sharp bend as you come out of Newton St Faith's, come out of the village. There's a sharp bend to the right, and as the road then runs up towards Hainford to the north. Once again, that's the view on that corner at Newton Road. You can see a good amount of established roadside treatment, roadside vegetation, I should say. See the extent of the site is right the way through there, so it's well screened from that viewpoint. Then these are some views from further afield. So this is much further over, viewpoint 5, which is just to the south of Newton St Faith. This is from footpath 1, and that's referred to within your report. Once again, you're looking across the fields. The extent of the site is, picking up through here in the distance. And that's the viewpoint looking from the winter and the summer from footpath 1, which is one of the most close positions that you can get to the site on a public vantage point. Then these are views from further to the southwest. This is looking over, not the solar panels, that's a poultry farm, which is in the foreground. The solar panels site would be beyond that hedge line. So once again, in the distance. So we'll take those through. And again, Manor Lane looking north. So again, that's a good distance away. You've got a roadside hedge, which prevents views across those quite sizable distance between the two there. And then I was going to take you through the views from the site itself. So this is on Spixworth Road. This is the site entrance where this Burgundy car is located. You can just see diagonally opposite as an access to the dwelling, and that's a dwelling at the poultry farm, and that's that access there with their property set behind this established roadside hedge. These are the views from properties, the boundary to Four Sticks, which is one of the properties in the middle of between the two areas of development. So that's the views across the field, and again, a good, strong, established hedgerow. I walked along that boundary and you can't see into the property at all this time of year. Obviously, that's the views from the winter on the left-hand side and the summer down here on the right-hand side. Similarly, that's Oak Dean in the winter on the top two, and summer when the hedgerow's in full leaf is very fully screened. Then this is Burgess Hill. So these are the two properties on Newton Road here on the corner. Once again, these top views are from winter. There is proposing, as it says on here, hedge to be planted along this boundary. So we will be getting some additional planting to go in along there. And in the summer, you can see it's more screened, obviously, when the landscaping is in full leaf. But we're going to be improving or proposing to improve the landscaping boundary along that particular part of the site. And that's the view from the studio, which is the property tucked in to the north here. And then we've got some views. Oh, sorry. So these are then This is from the noise report. So we can see on the yellow here is assessed receptors. So each of those are residential properties, which I've mentioned before. And then, so they're the noise sources, the green and the noise sources. So that will be the substation, the battery storage unit, inverters, and further inverters to the north here. And then these are sort of sound or noise contours. And you can see that the noise contours are obviously very focused in relation to the source of the noise, and don't extend to an extent to the receptors themselves, which are the yellow dots. Hopefully you can see each of those. If I need to zoom in, I can do that under the further discussions later on. These are the landscaping proposals. So it's proposed to, as I said, a deer corridor running through the centre of the site there to allow access. There's a nice woodland area in the back of the site here, which I think is in the rear of Four Sticks property. So obviously the deer go in there and they can get access through the deer corridor out beyond onto the open fields beyond. There's proposed to plant additional planting, new hedges on the western and southern boundaries. So along these areas here and there is where we're looking to put some additional landscaping. And then we'd get to the proposed construction traffic route, which is from the consultation replies. You can see that there's some concerns about that, given that the application site is up in this position here. The proposal is to bring the panels, bring the inverters, the storage containers, obviously on the back of lorries. That's going to come off of the Broadland Northway. So Broadland Northway is down here, going up the A140, turning right onto Church Street, going past the site that was item 1 on your agenda today, Abbey Farm Commercial. So we're coming into Horsham St Faith's, manoeuvring through St Faith's. Got some photos in a moment, so I can show you those. That then continues out of Horsham St Faith's along Church Street and reaches the junction here with Buxton Road. There's a little church just opposite. Take a left up Buxton Road, past the Viola depot, and then the road veers off and forks to the left. Continue this way to Frettenham, go this way up to the application site on Spixworth Road, and then that meets the application or the site access for the solar farm at that point there. So if we just, if I can hit the button, show you some of those images. So construction traffic will come through Horsham St Faith's, past the church, which is in this position here, right down and turn left then onto Crown Road, out of church or out of Horsham St Faith's in that direction. So this shows you the views here, turning that way and then taking the right down and then left onto Church Street. Then this is the view from Church Lane coming towards, I mentioned the church that's on Buxton Road, and the requirement then is to take a left there as shown on the plan and continue up Buxton Road north. And that's the fork in the road from Buxton Road that then forks through onto the Spixworth Road, and that's the route that the vehicles would then take and continue up north towards the site access. Views of Spixworth Road, which is obviously got high hedges either side, and it is a single carriageway, which is why we're recommending a construction traffic management plan to be submitted. And then this is the entrance, as I've shown before on that photograph. So vehicles will then come from Spixworth Road and then turn into the site itself at that point there, which is shown on the map before you. So hopefully that shows you the arrangement of the construction route. Then just some shots from within the site itself. So you can see the established roadside hedge along Spixworth Road in the summertime, view at the bottom there of the winter, and some just views from within the site itself. General sort of landscape features around the boundaries to the site and along the boundary to the property at Four Sticks, which is this one here. And then that's the final slide. I'll just leave that on. Just take you back through my verbal presentation. This is an application which seeks full permission for a ground-mounted solar farm with associated infrastructure, including 5 inverters, shipping storage container, substation and battery storage shipping container, which are located on the southwest side of the site where the overhead power line provides grid connection. 2-meter high wire boundary fencing and 38 pole mounted CCTV cameras at 3 meters high are located around the proposals. PV panels fixed to a series of metal arrays will have a maximum height of 3 meters above ground level. The site has an area of 29.1 hectares. It's estimated will generate 15 megawatts of electricity with a battery storage of 1.3 megawatts. Site boundaries are predominantly marked by native hedgerows, and the roadside boundaries to Spixworth Road is well established. New hedge planting is to take place along the western and southern boundaries, as I showed you on that landscaping plan. Gaps in the roadside hedge will be filled. The existing field access onto Spixworth Road is to be upgraded to 6 meters wide to provide access to the solar farm. Consultations and representations, these are all as reported, no updates to give. The supplementary schedule, as on item 1, has provided the new paragraph numbers as a result of the revised MPPF paragraphing. Turning to the assessment, the issues for consideration are the principle of development, the loss of agricultural land, need for development, landscape impact, biodiversity, neighbour amenity, traffic and transport, and drainage and flooding. These issues are assessed in detail within section 5 of the report. I therefore don't intend to reiterate the reasoning for each of these. However, based on the consultation replies, neighbour amenity impacts, traffic and transport, and the loss of agricultural land require particular analysis. Firstly, in assessing the proposals and the effect on neighbours, I will consider the disturbance from traffic associated with the use later in this presentation. In terms of the effects from noise, this can be divided between noise from the construction phase and then from the operational phase. Noise from the construction phase is likely to occur as the supports for the solar arrays are driven into the ground, and it is noted that there are residential neighbours around the application site. It is expected that there will be some noise and disturbance impacts from this construction, but which will vary in intensity depending on which parts of the site are being constructed at that time. The Council's Environmental Management Officer has recommended a construction environmental management plan is conditioned so that this includes procedures for site management, including dust control, method statements for construction, and monitoring arrangements. Given the temporary nature of the construction phase and its movement across the entire site, it is not considered that refusal could be warranted on these grounds. In terms of the operational phase, the submitted noise report shows that the inverters would reach their maximum noise level of 33.3 dBA at the nearest receptor on very hot summer days, and the majority of the year the noise output would be much lower. Only the battery storage unit would make noise at night, and this is shown to be at 3.3 decibels at the nearest receptor. The Council's Environment Protection Officer is satisfied that the proposed development would not cause unacceptable noise disturbance to local residents during its operational phase and meets policy requirements. In turning to the traffic and transport issues, it's noted the applicant has indicated the construction phase is likely to be 13 to 20 weeks. Most of this time will be the installation of the arrays and the fitting of the panels. There will be an initial few weeks when the materials are delivered and the larger pieces of equipment, i.e. inverters and the shipping containers, are brought to the site on large articulated lorries. The report sets out at paragraph 5.67 the traffic route, and I've shown you that on the slides. The Highway Authority has raised no objection to the principle of the proposals, but has requested conditions are imposed in respect of the access, in terms of visibility displays, signage along Spixworth Road, on-site workers parking, wheel cleaning facilities, and the submission of a construction management plan with the route attached. Concerns about rectifying any abnormal wear and tear to the highway as a result of these works will be dealt with by a Section 59 agreement, which the Highway Authority administer themselves. Although the concerns of neighbours, the parish council and district councillors are noted, I consider that as the delivery of the largest piece of equipment will take place for a short period, any impact will be limited. I don't consider this item alone could be a reason for refusal, especially with the conditions to be imposed in this respect to reduce the impacts of those proposals. Another key issue with the development of a solar farm on agricultural land is the loss of that agricultural land during the life of the installation, which in this case is 57 years, including the installation and decommissioning periods. The revised NPPF Para 175 and its footnote state that where significant development of agricultural land is demonstrated to be necessary, areas of poorer quality land should be preferred to those of higher quality. The NPPF defines best and most versatile land as land with grades 1, 2 and 3A of the agricultural land classification. Furthermore, a ministerial statement in March 2015 advises that where a proposal of a solar farm involves the best and most versatile agricultural land, it will need to be justified by the most compelling evidence. In this case, a specific agricultural land report has been submitted, and that identifies that there are no grade 1 or 2 land within the site. 29% of the site is grade 3A land and 71% is grade 3B. Therefore, 29% of the site would fall within the category of best and most versatile, and this is considered to meet the requirements of Para 175 of the NPPF. It should also be noted that the connection to the grid can be achieved on the site by connection to the overhead power line, and this is a significant reason why this site meets the site selection criteria. In conclusion, it is important to recognise the significant emphasis the government has placed on the delivery of renewable energy generation to meet the high carbon neutral targets, and this project will contribute to that for the life of the solar farm to tackle climate change issues. After careful assessment of the proposals against the main issues, I consider the proposal represents an acceptable form of development with benefits which outweigh the minor landscape harm, the temporary loss of agricultural land, and the disruption caused during the initial part of the construction phase. It's therefore recommended that permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out on pages 68 and 69 of your agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew of clarity? Councillor Hemphill.
Thank you, Chairman. Matthew, have you sought specific evidence to understand if the deer corridors suggested for that particular species of deer are actually a useful mitigation?
I'm going to refer back to the report because I need to just have a look to see how that's referred to in the report, because this isn't an application I've dealt with personally, so I need to look at those details if you bear with me. Yeah, we've got comments at page 50, para 4.12 from the Norfolk County Council ecologists. So they've looked at that aspect, and they have come back on a number of occasions. The deer corridor. So additional comments, page 51. Deer corridor has been incorporated, which is welcomed. Is a hedge still proposed in this location? Well, it is. So we've took advice from the ecologist on that side of things, and they recognise that, they welcome the provision of the deer corridor.
Okay, so my question was, has this deer corridor been assessed particularly to this particular species of deer? Because I know that all mitigation does not work universally for all species. So was that evidence sought?
Without asking the ecologist, we wouldn't be able to confirm that today for you, but it would be their duty to look at the ecology report that has been submitted and look at all the impacts. But without asking them direct, I wouldn't be able to answer that for you today.
Okay. No other, Councillor Beadle?
The transport, presumably in the recommendations that the transport plan from the south would be a condition. And you talk about the large lorries. How would you define a large lorry? Is it by height, length, or is it by weight?
I was thinking in relation to obviously they've got to be large enough to bring the containers to the site. So yeah, I'm considering these to be articulated vehicles. We do have the applicant or the agent speaking. They can give details, I imagine, insofar as the type of vehicles they use for this exact delivering these items to the sites. But yeah, I've imagining these as large articulated lorries bringing in the containers to the site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Dotter, if you can introduce yourself, your 5 minutes starts now.
Tony Dosser, I'm representing Hainford Parish Council. I'd like to declare I do live in Hainford, although I live a good way away from the site. Before I start, I'd just like to remind ladies and gentlemen, some of the words that the presenter used when he was describing that. He used the words property in the middle, so that was said from the bench. The noise came from computer assessments, not from real. You can't get real noise, I'm sure you'd agree, until such time as the thing is actually built. The Parish Council have looked at this very closely, and they recognise the obvious advantages that we all know about carbon neutrality. However, in list form, I'd like to say to you that they identify the significant loss of versatile agricultural land, as has been pointed out, the noise nuisance, particularly the closeness to the existing properties. The closest that I assess from the drawings provided is about 30 metres or less than 30 metres, a cricket pitch. The unsuitable site access and road network to support the construction traffic and anything else that comes. I came along that road deliberately this morning and I had to stop for a cycle. You can't get anything more than one car and a cycle by, as I'm sure other speakers will confirm. And I'd also like to, with respect, to remind the committee of the consistent report. We looked at other applications that have gone through, and land of this nature, 3A, and it's subjective how to a degree how you assess the land, would be a significant loss. And I trust you noticed in all the pictures the crops that were in all the lands of the pictures that were taken and shown to you, that it's land that's growing very versatile crops. And so I draw that to your attention. The noise would emanate from 6 locations affecting 9 residential properties. I took that extract from the noise report that's in front of you. Noise is clearly identified as an environmental nuisance that will unfortunately have to be continually tolerated by some local residents. And I'm sure any of you that live in the country recognise that at night time, when everything's very quiet around, you need very little noise to be an irritation. And this type of solar farm with all the fans and everything is likely to be quite noisy. The Parish Council, their interpretation of the policies that the government puts out, although it supports this type of development, don't consider that on balance this meets and satisfies those policies. This is the interpretation of the Parish Council. In addition, the Parish Council also understand land selected should aim to avoid affecting the visual aspect of the landscape and maintain the natural beauty of the rural area. Again, the Parish Council do not accept this requirement can be satisfied in this location, and I'm sure you would agree, those of you that live in the country. Hainford is a typical small Norfolk village, very small Norfolk village, with a particularly poor and old fragile road network, not in dispute, I don't think, anywhere. Totally unsuitable for the envisaged construction traffic. It's going to be exceedingly difficult to get traffic down that road. It should be noted that the site access is shown directly opposite a resident's property. Again, you saw that in the photographs. And the PC consider it inevitable the approach road selected will be continually blocked and almost certainly seriously damaged. I draw your attention again to the agricultural report, but the first paragraph states, on the survey date, this is a quote from the report in front of you, on the survey date, the majority of the land is stubble from previous arable crops and some autumn grown crops. Again, showing that this is good land. Thank you. That this land is suitable. This statement, in the opinion of the parish council, does not appear to support the land is unsupportive of versatile food production. The loss of land to food production resulting by this significant development, the PC parish council do not consider it is outweighed by the suggested benefits of the proposed renewable energy. The parish council further understand that government guidelines involving the sacrifice of versatile agricultural land as identified in this report would need to be justified by the most compelling evidence. In the judgment of the parish council, this application again fails to satisfy or demonstrate these requirements. In conclusion, the PC in principle, may I finish?
Carry on. Yes, carry on.
The PC in principle are unanimously supportive of applications regarding renewable energy. However, in this instance, on balance, the significant loss of land for food production, negative environmental impact, noise pollution, inadequate infrastructure to support the construction all outweigh this principle. Consequently, Hainford Parish Council are unable to give their support to this development. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dodson. Any questions for the public speaker? No? Okay, Mr. Shaw and Mr. Woods. Who's gone first? Mr. Shaw or Mr. Woods? Oh, quite happy. Okay, if you can just introduce yourself, sir, and your 5 minutes starts now.
Good morning. I'm a third generation farmer. I live in Hainford, very close to the site. My grandfather bought the farm in 1934. My father built the business up and made a good living off what is a very small farm by working it hard. I took over the farm in 1993, and to make the farm economically sustainable, we have also worked it hard, growing intensive vegetable crops such as potatoes, as well as cereals. Since the UK took the decision to leave the EU, farming subsidies are in the process of being completely phased out. In addition, environmental legislation in the UK is targeting net carbon zero and greatly improved air, water, and soil quality for agriculture. I strongly share these environmental goals. However, it is worth noting they will result in farming incomes dropping markedly to the point where if small family farms are to survive, they have to be allowed to diversify. As a farming business, despite already engaging in diversification schemes such as renting out storage space, letting the farm shoot to a syndicate, and undertaking contracting work for other farmers, the loss of income from the European Common Agricultural Policy will make the farm business unsustainable year on year. If we want small family farms in Britain to be economically sustainable, it is vital that farmers are allowed to secure different income streams. Otherwise, all that will remain will be large-scale farming corporations with no interest in enhancing local ecology. And as Prince Charles recently said, the heart will be ripped out of the British countryside. My second reason for offering the land for solar is that the government wants to build a low-carbon economy in the UK, and solar PV is one of the key renewable technologies that can facilitate this. Arable farming is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, however, and we as a farm can only offset this and can only afford to offset this by sequestering carbon if the farm is financially viable. Soil is the most significant factor in storing carbon, and solar PV would allow us to invest in sustainable technology and direct drill crops. This method of establishing crops is shown to sequester carbon in the soil. By using less than a quarter of the farm for solar, we could afford to incorporate straw and cover crops into the soil across the rest of the farm, instead of being forced to bale and sell straw through economic necessity. By doing this, we not only sequester carbon, but also add potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium to the soil sustainably, rather than applying them as chemical fertilizers. The soil on the fields in question has a high sand content, low organic matter, and consequential high demand for irrigated water, putting pressure on the river catchment area. In addition, the land is in a nitrate vulnerable zone, meaning there is a danger that nitrogen fertilizer may be leached in underground water already classified as being polluted by nitrogen. We chose these fields for solar because it is here that the soil quality is the poorest within the farm. By using these fields for solar, we will immediately have a positive impact on water quality by reducing nitrogen leaching. We are currently seeing increasingly frequent dry springs, meaning there is insufficient water available in these sandy soil fields. Last harvest, cereal yields on these fields were very low and below break-even point despite irrigating heavily. With developing climate issues caused by global warming, this will become a more frequent event. By taking these fields out of production, it will have a negligible impact on overall food production across the farm.
1 minute, Mr. Woods.
Thank you. Ultimately, I want to leave a farm to my children where the ecology is in a better place than when I took over the farm. My decision to offer this land for solar came from a desire to improve the biodiversity over the whole farm and to secure its long-term sustainability. The ecological management plan we will put in place will allow us to create really special and diverse habitats, as well as to continue to farm under and around the solar panels. Farming and solar PV complement each other by creating habitat for bees and other pollinating insects necessary for crop production. If consent is given for the solar PV, it would also negate the need to generate income from the shooting syndicate, immediately having a positive effect on wild duck, woodcock, and snipe populations. And the income from solar PV will allow the farm to pursue sustainable regenerative agriculture on the better farmland. Solar panels are a temporary and reversible use of farmland, allowing the land to be returned to food production at the end of the planning consent term. Therefore, I would encourage you to approve this highly sustainable development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Any questions for the public speaker? Okay, over to you, Mr. Shaw. If you can introduce yourself, sir, so the councillors know who you are.
Thank you. My name is Rob Shaw. I lead on planning matters for Pathfinder Clean Energy, the applicant. Good morning. So our proposed solar farm has four main objectives. Firstly, to support the UK's goal of net zero carbon by 2050 and the interim legally binding target of a 78% reduction by within 14 years from now. Secondly, to facilitate the transition to a zero carbon energy system by generating renewable energy. Thirdly, to enable the continued agriculture during operation through the use of sheep farming under and around the panels. And fourthly, to significantly, as Mr. Woods has said, increase the biodiversity on the site. This solar farm will offset around 4,500 tonnes of CO2 emissions every year, while generating enough renewable energy for over 6,000 homes. To achieve net zero, the number of solar installations in this country needs to treble in the next 9 years. To put this in context, if all suitable roofs within the Norwich area had solar installed, just 10% of the city's 1.5 million tonnes of emissions would be offset each year. So ground-mounted solar farms such as this one are needed, as well as rooftop and other sources. The countryside has always provided a shared function of providing food, leisure, and energy provision. And it also supports the livelihoods of the farming community and therefore the local economy. The beauty of our solar farm is that no agricultural land is lost. Indeed, farming can continue at the same time as providing much needed clean energy. The land is taken out of the cycle of intensive agriculture and rested during the operational period and improved by the removal of chemical fertilizers. So our solution, we feel, is far better in these fields for the quality levels and the problems, the pollution associated with leaching of nitrogen, etc., that Mr. Woods has articulated, far better to focus these fields on energy generation alongside sheep grazing and biodiversity enhancements. Alongside these climate, pollution and agricultural benefits, the proposals will dramatically improve the site's biodiversity Using Natural England's calculator, we've estimated these to be around 110% increase in habitat and over a 70% increase in hedgerows compared to the existing site. This will play a small but important part in reversing species decline in our country. We've taken advice from specialists, from Mr. Woods, the farmer, and the neighbours who understand the site and have helped us to improve the connectivity across the site. So in partly in answer to the question about the corridor, the 6 metre wide deer corridor, this was working with 4 Sticks who were looking to connect their improving biodiversity woodland to the wetland beyond. We've also incorporated space for mammals to move underneath the panels, along with new meadow planting to ensure an abundance of flora and fauna. Our rigorous site search process has demonstrated that the use of agricultural land here is necessary and that the majority of the fields are poor quality land as assessed, but also in reality as farmed. The site is well screened from footpaths and will be surrounded by either the existing hedgerows or new hedgerows all the way around the site. The short construction period will see an average of between 4 and 5 heavy goods vehicle deliveries per day, with a maximum of around 10 per at the peak period. The maximum size will be about 40 feet in length.
1 minute, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. So we've listened to the community's concerns. We've made some changes to the proposals, including moving the noise generating equipment well away from properties. So at night, it won't be audible at all. And during the day, on hot days only, it'll be at the level of a quiet room in assessment terms. That's the sort of 33 decibels. We've amended the access route, committed to a construction management plan to minimise impacts on residents, and we've improved wildlife, as I've discussed. So, to conclude, Broadland's future is net zero. Ground-mounted solar farms like this are a vital part of securing those significant reductions in CO2 emissions. Sorry. So we thank officers for the recommendation and we encourage councillors to support our application.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Any questions for the public speaker? Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Jim. Just you refer to a short construction period. What actually is the estimated construction period?
So we would estimate it to be between 13 and 20 weeks.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Councillor Looper, your 5 minutes, sir.
Good morning, committee. Well, this is outside the settlement limit. You could argue that development on this site is contrary to policy. Now, the NPPF makes out that the test here is actually to demonstrate that this development is necessary. And you could argue that basically putting a solar farm anywhere is necessary, given the climate emergency that the country faces. But in terms of the contribution that this part of Norfolk makes to that climate emergency and the generation of solar power, there is one elephant in the room, and that is that Scotto is less than 2 miles up the road. There is already very large provision of renewable energy coming from this part of Norfolk, just outside of Broadland. So it is quite incorrect to say that there were no appropriate allocations within the local area. We already have one of the largest solar farms in the country right on our doorstep. Now, the point has been made that to build this type of facility on 3A agricultural land, you need to have compelling evidence, again, around the necessity. That is a judgment for the committee to make. 100% of this site is grade 3 agricultural land. Nearly a third is grade 3A, so the highest and most versatile quality. And this committee has made a stand in the past about avoiding building on good quality agricultural land. The point has been made about neighbours and noise, and one thing that has been missing from here is the fact that to the back of this site, many of the neighbours live in mobile homes. There is Newton Park, a very large mobile home site, which are far more receptive to noise than neighbours who are in your normal brick and mortar houses. On the point of neighbours as well, when you look at the size of the site, it's very unusual to have a solar farm site that is basically a U around residential properties. This is a rural setting. There are neighbours. The neighbours' views are set out in the papers. I would urge you to consider those very carefully, in that there are neighbours with some very real concerns. This is a rural setting. If you walk the route, it is very clear to see that this will change the character of Spicksworth Road significantly, and that is important. The points made about transport are largely discounted. Now, I can understand the transport route for getting into this site down the very narrow Spicksworth Road. What hasn't been considered is how those vehicles are going to get out of it. Because what you don't see on the slide is, yes, it is a fork, Buxton Road and Spicksworth Road. If you're coming out of Spicksworth Road onto Buxton Road, you are blind to the left. That is not considered at all within this paperwork. And there is no other route out of Spicksworth Road other than that junction, because it's not wide enough actually to get these vehicles through. As Mr. Dosser has said, if you're in a car, you cannot get past a bicycle on this particular road. And there are very real concerns, albeit that the construction phase is short, that this will cause disruption not only on Spicksworth Road, but you also have the S-bend further back opposite Spicksworth Church, where any vehicle of any size has to go into the middle of the road round an S-bend in order to be able to negotiate. Now, you may say that none of these are single grounds for objection, but I think you can take them together. As I've said, you need to demonstrate the necessity. And as far as the contribution for this part of Norfolk, there is already a large contribution from elsewhere and very nearby. The compelling case around the use of good quality agricultural land is not made. There are real transport concerns around the narrowness of Spicksworth Road. That is another matter. And then there are the neighbour issues as well. I'm about to wrap up. Taking all these matters into consideration, I would urge the committee to look closely at the neighbour objections and to, with regret, reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Wilber. Any questions for the Councillor? Councillor Hampson and Councillor Beadle.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Actually, probably not so much for you, Dan, but the southern boundary of the application site, where it comes to the bottom, how wide is that? I mean, because it is quite a narrow corridor, as you pointed out, to be encased in solar panels on three sides is a bit uncomfortable.
I will defer to the officer on.
Well, we'll bring that up in discussion if you can't answer that, Councillor Wilber. Councillor Beadle.
Yes, Chair. The Spicksworth St Faith's Road is crossed by a whole road for a quarry. It's actually crossed, it doesn't join. And then it joins further up on the Frettenham side of Spicksworth. And if the traffic from that whole road needs to get to Horsham St Faith's, it then crosses where it actually crossed in the first place. So there is already a lot of HGVs going around that route, or potentially going around that route, where there's objections on the church junction of Spicksworth Church. Does this nullify some of the objections, or does it exacerbate it?
I don't believe the point you make does actually nullify the point, because actually the traffic route for Spicksworth Quarry is in the other direction. It is via Waterloo Road down Hainford, through Hainford, and then it travels south down Buxton Road. So it actually takes a different route to the one that you're describing there, Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Beadle. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilber. Lana, did you want to come in with that question for officers?
Well, yes, please. And actually, I'd quite like listening to Stuart's question as well. highways issue that he highlighted, has that been addressed? Because I couldn't find it in the highways consultation response, specifically that point raised.
If I come back, first of all, you talked about the southern boundary. Which pit are you talking about? The southern boundary here or the southern boundary to the neighbouring property? This one here. Yeah. Yes. I've walked along there. I parked my car at the site access and I walked along this boundary. I walked all the way around to that corner there. And that is a well-established hedgerow. Insofar as the width of it, I'd estimate it's probably about 1.5 metres wide. It's a good thick. There's a photograph of it. I'll see if I can find it. Oh, actually, I think it's that one. It's a well-established hedgerow. The panels are up to 3 metres high at their maximum point. So I don't think they come immediately adjacent to the boundary because there's an access road, access track. So we've got an access track. So we've got the boundary. You've then got an access track for, obviously, for access around the site. So the panels themselves are going to be set at least 3 metres, I'm estimating. I'm looking for a general nod across the other side of the room.
I would say typically around the site, and particularly where you're talking, we'd be talking somewhere between minimum 7 metres, but in some places up to sort of 14, 15, just depending on the sort of arrays. So there is naturally a gap, and it just varies slightly around.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Scale of these things makes it difficult.
If I could just say something on that.
Actually, you can't. This is for the councillors. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll come back on that. So the point that's being made is that at some points, obviously with these running in a horizontal line and this running at a diagonal, there are points when the panels finish and you've got greater separations. That's where the sort of the 14 metres or so would be in that kind of arrangement. But then it'll be closer where it comes closer to the point of the access track, which I'd say probably is 5-6 metres or so from that hedge. So we've got a substantial separation, and given the residential property is marked here with this square, this is all the land around the property. It's not immediately adjacent to that boundary. I'm content that property is going to be adequately screened by the hedgerow and the separation by the panels themselves.
Okay.
Insofar as the point about the highways, Highway Authority have obviously considered this and have given their comments to the application. I'm trying to find them within the report so I can highlight those for you. They will be, page 49, NCC Highways. So they made original comments where they were looking at the construction proposals, and then that continues where they wanted further information. So we went back twice to further information again. And then finally, they've looked at all the details. Actually, page 50, it says additional comments. These conditions to ensure construction traffic is contained to the most appropriate routes to and from the site during construction and abnormal wear and tear is addressed. So the Highway Authority haven't just looked at the route to the site, they've looked at the proposals from the site, which was the point I think Councillor Roper made that hasn't been considered. I haven't shown those details as part of my presentation, but the Highway Authority have looked at that and have considered that the site to and from the site is acceptable, although they're asking for a more detailed construction management plan to be submitted so that would then identify some of these specific issues and how the applicant proposes to address some of these specific issues, whether that needs a banksman to stand at the roadside, either stopping traffic and letting vehicles through when they know certain deliveries are taking place. It would be that level of detail that the Highway Authority will be looking for to be satisfied for them to recommend approval for their construction traffic plan, and which is to be forthcoming. But the principle and the arrangements that are shown, the Highway Authority are satisfied that the route to and from the site is workable for them.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Karimi?
Matthew, would that management plan involved, like, if a truck is delivering and one is leaving, that they're not going to meet on that small road? That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, that'll all be coordinated, and ultimately, as I said, the developer's got control over which vehicles, which order the site's developed ultimately.
Okay.
And that's the benefit with this, that it's one contractor that's undertaking all of these works. It's not like a housing developer when perhaps the contractor comes with the bricks, one time, and the tiles are coming, and then you've got that sort of crossover. This is all managed by one operator, and that's why we're confident that the traffic management plan can be developed in that detail to ensure that there's adequate time for vehicles to leave before the next one arrives. That's usually how these things take place, and whether they need to be held away from the site somewhere, then that'll be something that's dealt with.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Well, I propose to go with officer's recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Fisher. So it's proposed to go with officer's recommendation with conditions. Proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Fisher. All those in favour?
Unanimous, Chairman.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Just you now, Mrs. Mooney. Okay, moving on to item 4, Haverscroft Close, Tabram. Over to you, Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is proposal. It's a household proposal: demolition of existing garage, new replacement garage with a driveway and extension to the existing bungalow at 122 Haverscroft Close, Tabram. This is the application site outlined in red here. So this is number 122. Haverscroft Close is part of the Thorpe Marriott development. So we've got a housing development here of primarily 2-storey houses. I think this property here is a pair of semi-detached bungalows, and the access for number 122 and these two properties, which I think is 120 and 118, runs in front of the properties and then runs down the side here. If I move in a little bit closer, members may recall that this property, albeit the red line is for today's application, we have had in the past an application to develop the land to the rear here, so that runs right the way to this boundary for 2 dwellings. And there's permission was granted in outline for a pair of semi-detached bungalows at the back of the site here, and that has now been granted reserve matters approval. I've got a plan to show that in a moment. And the access for those 2 dwellings passes down the side here. Obviously, with the garage sitting there as it does at the moment, that's blocking that. So that's the reason why that garage is to be demolished and resited about this position here in this corner. That tree is no longer there, as you'll see from the photos in a moment. And then, extend to the front of the property in this position here. So if we go through those photographs, you can see the built form of development around it. We've got a terrace of 3 properties, I think it is, immediately to the east, and then the bungalows that sit to the sort of the southwest there. These are then the proposals. So we've got, I might need to go in a little bit closer on these because they've all been put on one slide, which makes it a little bit difficult. But you can see that the proposal is to extend the bungalow. What's the best way of doing it? Extend the bungalow this area here. So that's the front extension. Currently, it's a hipped roof. So it's just a hip roof that comes to a bit of a pyramid. The proposal is to extend to the front, to come towards this boundary with the bungalow, which is just, if Move that down just enough. Yeah. So in plan form, that's the extension that's coming forward towards the boundary with the bungalow at number 120. A roof is then spanning over that. A hipped roof is then spanning over that. And the extensions that currently exist on the back of the property are to be demolished to facilitate the position of the garage over on that boundary there. This then becomes the garden area for the property, which I'm estimating, if that's a garage, that's going to be about 5.5 meters deep. Lengthwise, that's probably at least 15 meters or so garden depth. So you can talk about the length of that garage. That's going to be 5 meters, 10 meters, 15 meters or so. I'm saying that estimating that garden space down the side of the property. But that's the form of the extension. It in itself sits, follows the main ridge of the roof. It's actually, that's the elevation towards the neighbouring property. It's blank on that end elevation. So there's no windows towards the neighbour. We've got bifold doors into the garden area and a little window towards the driveway. So if we then go through the photos, hopefully you get a bit more context. Oh, that's the arrangement for the properties to the rear. If I just close that up a little bit, you hopefully see those. So that's the properties to the rear of the site. Our bungalow, which is the application site, sits here. Hope you can understand that. It would have been nicer to have all of that on one drawing, but different agents and don't have the ability to copy one drawing onto another, I'm afraid. But that's the arrangement for the two dwellings at the back of the site with garden areas serving those two properties. They are slightly smaller. I think they are 2-bed units. Yeah, so each of that's a 2-bed, and then that's the 2-bed for those. So they are slightly smaller, and it was seen that was probably about as much we could achieve for that. We did scale that back a couple of times and managed to get that back to there, and thought that's the garden area for a 2-bed property. And our bungalow obviously sits in this position here. Its garage is going to be, driveway is going to run here, and its garage will sit in about that position relative to the two plans, if you can understand. That's the arrangement of the property itself, the bungalow. As I said, proposal is to pull the roof out towards this boundary, big high brick wall to the neighbouring property at number 120. No windows towards that. So there's no overlooking or even overshadowing, because this is north of the neighbouring property. That's a view of a footpath that runs through to another part of the development, but you can see the boundary that runs all the way down, and this will be the access into the existing bungalow and the two dwellings beyond it. That's the garage to be demolished, and then driveway forming down to the two dwellings beyond. And that's just a general arrangement of this bungalow. Currently, this is a bit of a sort of parking turning area for the property, and the extension is going to come into that area there. This is then to the rear. I mentioned the extensions to the rear to be demolished, so we're taking those away to facilitate a garage in about that position and a driveway that then comes across the back of the existing bungalow. So trying to achieve a garage and parking and turning for this property, as well as the arrangement for the approved two dwellings. So yeah, these are all coming away on the back here. And that's the arrangement to the neighbouring properties. I mentioned the terrace, so they've got a high fence through there and garden areas, but we don't consider that a garage structure, pitch roof garage in that position is going to cause undue impact to the amenity of that property. I think there was one slide I wanted to show you. So yeah, this is then going to be the garden area for the bungalow, which I've said, garage coming across this position here. Consider that. Okay, I think that's acceptable for a property on Thorpe Marriott of this sort of scale. None of them have particularly large gardens, and you can see that would still be adequate for a property of that scale. So leave that one on while I just briefly go through the verbal. This has been reported to committee as the application has been called in by Councillor Karimi Gavanlu for determination by the Planning Committee for the reasons set out in section 4 of the report. You've seen the application seeks permission for an extension to the bungalow, demolition of the existing and rebuilding of the garage, and that we've had a subsequent planning approval for two dwellings to the rear. no updates to the report, and no MPPF revisions to be revised as part of this. Assessment, issues for consideration on the principle of development, impact on neighbour amenity and the impact on the character and appearance of the area. Site is located in the settlement limit within the Thorpe Marriott housing estate, where the principle of residential extensions is acceptable, providing there is no significant adverse impact. In turning to the residential amenity, the front extension is set to the southern elevation and to the north of the neighbour at number 120. This is also a bungalow, and that will not reduce sunlight to that particular neighbour. The extension has been designed with a hip roof and no windows towards the neighbour, so will not cause any overshadowing impact or loss of privacy. Finally, in respect to the character appearance of the area, the site is located amongst an area of dense residential development where properties are either semi-detached, terraced, and in most cases on narrow, relatively small plots. The proposal to extend the property to the front will be visible in the street scene with materials to match the main bungalow, and whilst the removal of existing extensions to the rear and the resiting of the garage will not be visible, it is considered that this creates the space for the driveway, so gains amenity space that is lost to the south. As a result of the proposals, the side garden will be the property's only usable garden space. However, this is considered to be wide enough and long enough for the property and still retains the character of the surrounding area. In conclusion, the proposals represent an acceptable form of development, and the recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions listed on page 74 of your agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew for clarity? No? Oh, Councillor Carini?
Matthew, if you go back to the map on page 70, it shows the highway stops about 3 houses away from that plot. So presumably any cars going into those 3 houses now will have to go over private driveways.
Yeah.
Is that right?
On that basis, yeah, it's appropriate to have 8 dwellings served up a private drive. So.
No, what I mean is that they're going to have to go past the driveways of those previous 3 houses to get to the plot size.
Yeah. Well, that was what was considered and granted at the outline stage when we brought the item to committee last time. That was one of the issues.
Because there were quite a few objections from those houses.
Yeah. Sorry, I only got a microphone on. No, that was one of the reasons, and one of the when we brought the item to committee for the 2 dwellings was the issue of access and proximity. And I think there was even a condition imposed to deal with the construction and the management of those to ensure materials were delivered at appropriate time and that kind of thing, so it wasn't unneighbourly to the residents. But ultimately, that's a civil matter between parties to ensure that access to the highway, which, as you rightly say, is on the end of the cul-de-sac here, is able to be achieved and maintained throughout the development period. Obviously, that access exists at the moment and serves the bungalow. This proposal won't be adding to that. The 2 dwellings will be adding to that, and that's been considered and granted previously at committee.
Okay. Any other questions for Matthew? Okay, Mrs. Mooney, if you can introduce yourself, and your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councillors and officers. I'm just representing the parish council here. We have looked at this property very carefully, and you have been advised that the team think that there should be no objection to this proposal. It sits in the middle of lots of houses, as you can see on that plan, and the parish council consider that this is serious overdevelopment because it is currently a 2-bedroomed bungalow, and they want to move it to a 4-bedroom bungalow. And as you can see from your plans, there's one garage. They're going to have to knock down the garage, which is fine, and move it to the right side of the property. Now, in our experience, and you will know this from living here in Norwich, families tend to stay together longer now. They can have kids at home till they're 30 or whatever. So in our experience, there is a space for 1 garage, 1 car park, and if there are 3 cars in that family, where are they going to park? So parking could be an issue, we think, and it's very likely to happen. The other point I'd like to make is we would like to request a covenant to be included in this bungalow so that no further dormer, windows or loft conventions are allowed on the first floor, because from our experience, where it's lovely to have loft space, and that's a good thing, often what happens when somebody comes in and buys a house, they then come back to you and ask for planning permission to put rooms in the loft space. And we think that would be very unneighbourly in the circumstances. It would be overlooking all the houses that surround that property. We'd also like you to put a strict and observed conditions on the property to be applied to the construction and the delivery times so that it's not unneighbourly to all the houses that surround that property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions for the public speaker? Or do you want to pick up on the?
Yeah, Alan and I were just speaking about the point you made about the dormer windows. We think that's probably a fair point and something we can probably would suggest a condition if members are agreeable to that, to add a condition on that.
Just to confirm, we don't have the ability to put covenants on, but we can remove permitted development rights to allow those further dormer windows to go in the roof space. And I think that is an additional condition that would be appropriate.
Okay. Any other questions? Over to you, councillors.
Right.
Okay.
So just to confirm. That will now be a condition.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Helmsall?
Could the officers please also address the construction traffic time issue that the public speaker raised?
I think that for an extension to a dwelling wouldn't be reasonable. We very rarely put that on for an extension to a dwelling. We did consider that as a proposal for the erection of 2 new dwellings in the rear of that property, but I wouldn't, in my opinion, would be for a single story extension to a dwelling. That wouldn't be necessary in this case for an extension, remembering that a lot of extensions to dwellings are permitted development and we've got no control over that. So in this case, I don't think that would be reasonable, where it was considered reasonable for the erection of 2 dwellings, which had a longer time period and more construction traffic.
Okay, so would it perhaps be helpful to remind the committee what the limit on construction hours is for the 2 bungalows? Because I think that needs to be reiterated.
We would have to look that up. We haven't got that obviously as part of this application, but we can look online for you. That will take a few minutes to do, but we haven't obviously got that permission in front of us.
But we don't need that information to make the decision on this application.
No, I wouldn't say it's necessary to make this decision. It's something we can let members know of those conditions, but equally we could pause and look up that permission if members felt that was necessary.
Well, Chairman, I think as a matter of courtesy to our public speaker who has come to, voice concerns of the parish council, I think it would be helpful as part of the record of this meeting to say that that has been limited. Thank you.
Matthew's on it. Councillor Folger?
Given the discussion we've had and the suggested conditions which have been mentioned, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Folger. Seconded by Councillor Fisher, and we'll just get...
Sorry, I didn't think we'd finish up answering the questions.
No, we
first.
haven't. I've just got a proposal and a seconder, but I'm not closing. I'm not going
Okay.
to vote until we've got that information.
Okay. Can I just say, when I was asked to call this in, I was asked to call both of the applications in together. And part of the problems was the construction traffic going in and out of that plot inside a residential area and having to go over people's driveways to access the plot.
Yes.
That was a major concern.
Yeah, and Matthew's looking at that, but the
Thank you,
proposal, I can't stop the guy's proposal and seconding, but we're not closed to discussion.
So this is the decision notice for the 2 dwellings. This was the outline application that was reported to committee. And condition 5 states construction works and deliveries shall be restricted to between 08 hours and 17 hours, Monday to Friday, and 8:30 to 1 on Saturday. No time on Sundays and bank holidays. So we set a development window, as it were, of 8 till 5 Monday to Friday and 8:30 till 1 on Saturdays. And that was obviously because of the scale of development for the 2 dwellings. We're drawing a distinction between that and the single story extension currently before members, but hopefully that answers that for you.
Thank you, Matthew. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, because I asked the question, and I think that the ward members will of course inform the neighbouring properties to say that those limitations are in place, and should a breach of condition happen, then that can be reported back to the council's enforcement team. Thank you.
Certainly. Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, well, it's been proposed by Councillor Folger and seconded by Councillor Fisher to go with the officer's recommendation. All those in favour?
6, Chairman.
And all those against?
1, 2, 3 against.
Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Okay, moving on to agenda. Sorry, are you sorted on? A little bit of maths.
Didn't add up,
They did what, 6 and 3? Didn't add up to 9 again?
10 people in the room.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, appeals.
Yes, I'll take this item, Chair. So you've got before you on page 75 of your agenda a summary of the appeal decisions that have been received, and also one appeal that's been lodged. If I can just give you a little bit of a summary around each of those. So starting on the first one, Oak Dean, which is on Green Lane, Horsford, for 6 bungalows, associated garages, parking and gardens. That was a delegated refusal. It went to an appeal hearing, and the appeal has been allowed. Summary of the reasons, and these decisions are all on the website for you, so you can look at those details or look at the exact wording of the appeal decisions. But in summary, the inspector has allowed that one as it is adjacent to a major housing development. It was close to the David Wilson Homes scheme, which is under construction at the moment. The inspector considered it was close to village services. There was no harm to the character and appearance of the countryside. The second one on there, Adam and Eve House, Little Hobbits, was one that went to committee, actually, for a 2-bedroom dwelling. Was reported to committee and was refused at committee. That one was also allowed. The inspector's reasoning is that they don't consider this is isolated and therefore not a Para 79 dwelling. It's within the garden area of the Adam and Eve House, so there's no encroachment into the countryside as it's a garden plot. And the inspector considered there was not harmful to the character and appearance of the area, and also referred to the dwelling being within proximity of the settlements of Buxton and Coltishall, and considered that a dwelling in this location would support those nearby settlements. Thirdly, the platform, Broadland, Little Plumstead, was a delegated refusal. That was also allowed. That one's in proximity to the settlement limit. It's sort of diagonally opposite. Anyone that knows Broad Lane has got the railway line and the level crossing on it. So the settlement limit was just diagonally on the opposite side of the road, on the other side of the level crossing. And the inspector granted this because of the proximity to the settlement limit. It was a previously developed site and didn't consider there was harm in respect to the character and appearance of the area or the neighbour to the north. There's no neighbour to the south. So there was content on that one. And then finally at 25 Holman Road was a delegated refusal for subdivision of a property and the erection of a dwelling. That one was dismissed as the inspector considered that development, albeit was in the settlement limit, was out of character with the surroundings. It represented a cramped form of development and would result in overlooking to neighbours' private gardens and their rear elevations. So that one was dismissed. The final one on the list there is a new appeal that's been submitted in Aylsham to convert a existing workshop within the rear of the garden of the property. And they want to convert that to holiday accommodation. And we await the inspector's outcome on that particular one, which will be reported to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions? No? Sorry, Lara. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed by these stats, sort of like, 3 out of 4 appeals allowed. I am disappointed. I think in particular is, the Adam and Eve house did we insist on that particular application, or did we turn it down because it didn't meet the requirements of the para, whatever it is.
Para 79.
79, that's the one.
Yeah.
Too many numbers.
It was one that was reported to committee not that long ago, so some members may recall it. And it was one of those where it was more of a sort of contemporary design within the garden area. I think it had been submitted on the basis of Para 79, but we didn't consider that the architectural quality was of high enough standard for us to be able to recommend or for members to approve it on the day. And the inspectors took a view that, okay, it's not isolated, it's not a Para 79, but found some other merits with it, which is an interesting one to read because, as I said, with all of these, we take a view and we're surprised when the inspector takes a different view to us, because obviously we wouldn't have gone to refusal and bringing it to members to committee if we didn't feel that was the right outcome. But
okay, Helen, you're going to come in?
There have been a few decisions, the inspector giving weight to different parts of our policies. So we are going to do a bit of evaluation on that to see whether in our decision making we also need to take into account, and that would come back to be reported to the committee on that. So we always look to evaluate decisions. Sometimes it's just a different judgment. Sometimes there's a pattern, and where there is a pattern, we then have to take that into account. So we will always monitor those decisions and bring back any learning from them and reflect that in our future decision making. So yes, there has been unusually, I could agree with Councillor Hemphill, it's been unusually that there has been a number overturned by the inspector, but equally there has been some really good clarification of some decisions. So it's actually taking that in the round and making sure we reflect on that and feed into you in our future decisions on any that we need to actually look at slightly differently if that is the case.
Councillor Adams?
Yeah.
One second, Councillor Adams.
I have to say I'm particularly disappointed with the Horsford one because I've read the report now in full, as Helen knows. She's very kindly sent it to me. And yes, he talked about the JCS, the inspector. I presume it's a him, but it might be a her. And basically has completely ignored one of the most relevant parts of the JCS, in my view, in the fact that Horsford is a service village, should only have had 20, maximum up to 20 houses, according to the JCS. It's had about 350, I would think, roughly, near enough. And yet that part of the JCS was not touched upon by the planning inspector at all, which is deeply disappointing.
Thank you, Tony. Lana?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back. I think perhaps this committee might in future welcome a summary of key learnings that we're taking away from this as a local planning authority, because having three out of, if we had 3 out of every 4 appeals, if we lost them, that really wouldn't bode well when it comes to our annual monitoring report. So it would just be helpful, I presume, to the committee and just the department generally to get on top of this.
Yeah, as already responded to your first question, we are going to do that very bit of work and report it back to committee, as already mentioned today. So we will be looking at that.
Councillor Foot.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the point mentioned by Councillor Adams, I think, was also mirrored by some inconsistent decisions by the planners in that respect. As far as Blowfield was concerned, one of them set a limit, and then we had 3 successive applications after that, which we refused, but clearly some of them were allowed, and it was this general impression that the planning inspectorate, depending on who did it, was inconsistent, and we did suffer from that.
Thank you, Councillor Volter. Councillor Beadle?
Yeah, Chair. I would be a bit cautious about jumping in and wanting to change our policies wholesale, because it might be that these approvals were actually a series of one-offs. And I've had cases with a different hat whereby that was clearly the case.
Okay, thank you.
And I totally concur with that. I did have a very heavy caveat. We always need to reflect and learn from any decisions and see whether there are any patterns and whether they are material to any future decisions. Often they have a bespoke, which is why we always say each case is looked on its own merits. There might be an extra material consideration that's just a one-off to that development. That doesn't mean to say our policies are not correct in the way we're interpreting them. So I can totally concur with that point, Councillor Beadle. And when we look at recent decisions, we've had some in the last week which aren't reported here, which will be reported next time, which I think we do need to do, as Councillor Hemser says, look at those in the round and actually report any findings back to you.
Okay, unless there's anything else, ladies and gentlemen. Go on. It's not.
Shall we?
Okay, well, let's just close this meeting then. Okay, that's 12:10. Thank you very much.